Hey, this is Pastor Dave, and I'm here with Vacation Bible Stories. We're recording at Perry Methodist on the YouTube Bright Star Parish link. And so this is the story of David, at least the beginning of the story of David, found in 1 Samuel 16. Samuel went to the house of Jesse. That'd be the same Samuel we talked about in the last post. Samuel grew up and became a prophet, and he went to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. For God had chosen one of his sons to be the king of Israel. And when he saw Jesse's eldest son, a fine-looking young man, he thought, surely this is God's chosen one. But God told him not to judge by appearances. God looks at the inside of a person, not on the outside. And one by one, Jesse brought all of his sons out, but none of them was chosen. Finally, Samuel asked if he had any more sons. And Jesse answered, there is the youngest, David, but he's out tending the sheep in the field. And when the young shepherd boy was brought before Samuel, the Lord spoke, this is the one I have chosen him. And Samuel anointed him by sprinkling a few drops of oil on his head, but it was sometime later before David would become king. For now, he stayed at home tending the sheep, passing the hours by playing his harp and practicing with his sling. But from that day onward, God was always with him. Young David stood before Goliath, and mighty Goliath was a fearsome champion of the Philistine army. He was so big and powerful that he was practically a giant. And Goliath had challenged the Israelite soldiers to single combat, but not one of them had dared to fight this terrible warrior. But David did. God had been with him and had protected and as God had protected his sheep from the lions and the bears, David knew that God would be with him now. The king gave David his own armor and weapons, but they were too big and heavy for the young boy. And so David stood before Goliath with nothing but his staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream. Goliath laughed when he saw the young shepherd boy, but David fearlessly ran toward him, putting a stone in his sling and flinging it with all of his might. He hit Goliath in the middle of the forehead, and he fell to the ground. And David raced up, and drawing out Goliath's own sword, he cut off his head with one stroke. And the Philistines were so shocked when they saw their champion had been killed that they turned and ran away.
Pastor, what do you think we can learn from this experience that David had with Goliath?
I guess one of the things that we can learn, the most obvious thing we can learn from the story of David and Goliath, is that, well, and it was there at the call of David as well, that God doesn't judge by appearances. He looks at the inside of a person, is what he had said when he chose David. God had said to Samuel when he chose David to be king. And so, yeah, the idea that we tend to say, well, you're small, you can't really do too much. But God doesn't look at things the way that we look at things. He doesn't see things from the outside. He sees things from the inside. And so that would be one lesson. The other lesson, and it has to do with the previous post that we had made, it's the idea that God, if God calls us, then God provides for us. And so David had been called to be king. He'd been called ultimately, I think, to defeat Goliath. And the temptation that Saul had was to dress him in armor. And Saul did that out of concern for David. He wasn't trying to hurt him. He was trying to protect him. But David said, this doesn't fit me. I think it's always tempting for us to look at other people, sometimes successful people, and say, well, I should be like them. If I can only be like them. I know that's true for preachers. If I could be like that famous preacher. But I mean, that's true for all of us. It's true for communities and churches. It's true for, it may be true for nations. If I could only be like so-and-so. But I think if God calls us to a particular destiny, to do something, then God's already provided for us. And so David is particularly situated to defeat Goliath because he knows how to use a sling. And that wasn't something that Goliath had anticipated. But I think that's probably, ultimately true for all of us, that if we have figured out and discerned that we're in God's will, then He'll provide for us. He'll figure out a way for us, that we're in the place we need to be by being just who we are and not trying to be somebody else. So those are a couple lessons from the story of David.
Thanks, Pastor.